Welcome to Inside the DBL, brand new series. I'm incredibly excited to be here. The fans of small ball back in the day, I'm sure you're excited to see my face resurface on the big screen. I'm incredibly excited to bring a little bit of a media flavor into the DBL and some more consumable content for you all of you wonderful fans of the sport and league that we all love. It's draft season. It's all-star season. Should say all-star season is in the rear-view mirror at the moment. The first half is complete. So what I want to do today, it's going to be a quick-ish and sort of dumbed-down version of the show. I wasn't sure exactly how I wanted to present it, how I wanted to edit it, and all that. So no edits today. In the future, it'll be a more consistent schedule, and it will also be a little bit more interactive. We'll have some guests, we'll have interviews, etc., and then we'll also have some more visual features for you as well in the form of edits, clips, things of that nature. But thank you for joining me. What I want to do today, since the first half is behind us, I want to go ahead and grade every team on their first half. So like I said, today is going to be quick and easy. I'm going to get right into it. I'm going to go division by division, and I'm going to grade each organization on how I think the first half of this season went in all regards, not just on the field, but in general, and how the first half potentially sets them up for the future. May that be for the remainder of this season or potentially beyond for those teams that are looking ahead. Okay. Let's get right into it. We'll go division by division. I'm going to start with the Modern East Division and the Baltimore Bradfords. The Bradfords, I'm going to give a C. I've been exceptionally disappointed with what I've seen from the Bradfords this year. Now, they're still tied for that second wild card spot, obviously in a position to make the postseason, I hope, or they hope. But it's been underwhelming, and they made their first trade, their first real major transaction, really, since GM Matt Sticks-Fajore took over a couple years ago. And I think it's been rather indicative of where they sit. And I'm going to touch on this later on in the show. But they're a bit too stagnant. And there are teams like them who have struggled with injuries. But the teams that are more fluid, that are more reactionary, that are able to kind of shift gears on the fly, have responded to those injuries much more effectively than the Bradfords have, who are kind of depending on a depth system that isn't really there, right? Because while they've built some depth, it's not always effective for plugging in the right spots, right? They're relying on guys that they've kind of built this roster, right? This deep roster, I will say, but they've built it for a couple of years without making any adjustments, without shifting in a different direction. The type of guys that they've accumulated, the type of resources, right, the type of players, more specifically, were tailored to what they were doing when they were sort of structuring this organization a couple years ago. They might not be the best fit now. So the teams that are adjusting on the fly, that are replacing injured players, underperforming players with guys that they're adding, right, this season, maybe even this past offseason, are going to be a much better fit than players that have kind of grown up in this organization and may or may not be in line with the direction that they're headed. So they've been very average. They're 9th in total scoring with 11.8 points, so almost exactly 0 points. They're averaging 0.01 points per game, and they're average. I mean, they're like I said, contending for a playoff spot, which is great, but coming off back-to-back seasons in the finals, including a Modern Conference Championship in 2024, contending and fighting for a playoff spot at the last minute is underwhelming for sure. So I'm going to give them a C because I don't think they've been particularly managed very well. They've also, Matty Sticks has won back-to-back Manager of the Years, and this year I haven't seen quite the same. So they're going to get a C. The Baton Rouge Blizzards. So this is interesting. They've struggled this year. They are third to last in total scoring. They are not in any sort of position to make the playoffs. Obviously, they haven't even amassed double-digit wins at the halfway point. But I'm going to give them a B because I like what they've done in the trade market. They've been very aggressive. They know their direction. They have a clear sense of where they're headed, which I thoroughly appreciate and value quite highly. And they're in an interesting year, and we're going to talk about the draft in just a few minutes. It's an interesting draft because it's very, very weak at the top, in my opinion, and it seems like they might have similar feelings, maybe. More on that in a second, but they've been aggressive, moving around the draft, adding a couple more picks. It seems like they have a clear sense of how they want to approach the back half of this rebuild, we'll hope. So I'm going to give them a B. They've really underperformed on the field. In Ethan Sadowitz's second year, I would have liked to see a little bit more progress, but I do like how they know what they want, and they're being aggressive and going out and trying to achieve that. The Bismarck Beefcakes are going to get a B-. They've been okay. I would say it's been a very average season relative to their expectations. Firmly in playoff position. They are a game up on that second wild card spot. I think maybe coming into the season, they had expectations of being one of those top flight blue blood type teams. And in a season where their division, the Modern East, has underperformed, this would have been a perfect opportunity for them to reach out, take that top spot, and really dominate that division, and they have not done that. They have 43.6 total points on the season, which is respectable by all means. But I think what hurts them a little bit in my eyes is the fact that, like I said, they haven't faced a whole lot of competition. They've faced negative 94 points against, which I don't really look at points against that much. I think it's very matchup dependent. Every game is different. Total points over the course of a season are not that useful for telling the story. But like I said, the Bradfords are underperforming. The back two teams in their division, the Wrenches and the Blizzards, are bottom flight teams right now, the way that they sit in 2025. I think this was an opportunity for Bismarck to really take that leap, right? They had a strong season last year, missed out on the playoffs and in the final month of the season, back in 2023, and then finally last year, really looked like one of those top flight headed organizations. I mean, obviously they have a ways to go as far as their superstar firepower, but it looked like they had the pieces to maybe do something interesting late in the year, and this was going to be the year that they really took the next step. And I haven't seen that. I've seen another good but not great season, so I'm going to give them a B-. The Manchester McMissiles get an A+. I can't say enough about what GM Mason Shapiro has done. Now, here's the thing. They have negative total points on the season, yet they lead their division, the Modern East, at 22-10. They have basically exceeded every expectation they might have had for this year. The rebuild started a couple years back, maybe 2 to 3 years back, maybe a little bit more even. That might be a little bit generous, depending on how you want to look at it. But what I love so much about what they've done this year in particular is the patience, right? They are performing incredibly well on the field, but they still have the best farm system in the league, and they have not reached out and tapped into it yet. Now, we might see some of that at the deadline. I honestly hope that we do. But I love how they're staying patient. They understand who they are. They're not getting ahead of themselves and looking at themselves as a dominant franchise at the moment, because they're not, and they understand that, and I respect that. They're confident with where they are. They're content with where they are. They're in first place in their division. They're firmly in the playoff picture, and yet they still possess the most valuable assets of any team in the league that's not actually putting a product on the field at the moment. So they can tap into that if they want, and their patience and their exquisite management has given them the opportunity to have choices. How they want to approach this deadline. Do they want to tap into that farm system and make a really good push? I don't even think they need to. You'll talk about the negative 42 total points. I don't care. They're winning ball games, and that's all that matters. This season could not be going any better for the McMissiles in any way, shape, or form, and Mason Shapiro is honestly putting in a bid for GM of the year, certainly manager of the year. It seems like he's a front runner for that award, but GM of the year could be on the horizon as well. The McMissiles get an A+. The Wrenches get a B+. They haven't done that much on the field, obviously. Negative 260 total points is never where you want to be. But I do like that they've been active in the trade market. Similar to the Blizzards, they kind of know where they want to go and have an understanding of how they want to get there. So they don't have a lot of talent. This is a front office that obviously is in uncharted waters here, just still sort of feeling stuff out. I'm not going to hold too much against them. I don't like to be too lenient with new GMs, with young GMs, rookie GMs in particular, because at the end of the day, you're going to put players out on the field that have to get the job done, and there's only so much the general manager can do. But with half of a season, I'm going to cut a little bit of slack, and I don't think they've performed well. But it hasn't been anything that's, particularly horrifying to witness. They honestly got off to a strong start, better than I would have expected. And they've looked, honestly, competitive against almost anyone in the league. Maybe not the top teams, but I'm going to give them a B+. Moving on to the Vintage East, the Atlanta Aardvarks. I'm going to give them an A-. They've had a good season. They've had a great season. I'm going to go ahead and say they've had a great season. Now, they're obviously not dominating the regular season like we've seen in years past, but they're second in scoring. They are currently the top seed, or currently leading the Vintage East division. They're currently leading the entire Vintage Conference and in a position to get the number 1 seed and 2 buys in the first 2 rounds, a bye in each of the first 2 rounds of the playoffs. What can you really say against them? That they're not absolutely annihilating every single team? I think our expectations, the media's expectations from what I've heard for this organization is win, no matter what, every single time they step out on the field. And obviously, I'm going to say that that's not realistic, but for them, they've honestly made it a realistic possibility, and that's sort of been their reality over the last probably 5 regular seasons, if not more. So we've been accustomed to seeing them cruise through the months April through August and absolutely dominating the league. We're not seeing that this year, but coming off back-to-back championships, back-to-back extended postseasons, and grappling with probably the most difficult cap situation in the league, they're still leading the better conference, the Vintage Conference, which is a much stronger conference, and showing no signs of slowing down. So I'm going to give them an A-. The Dansby Lions are also going to get an A-. They had an interesting season in 2024 where they missed the playoffs for the first time in 9 years. They're 23-9. They're 3rd in total scoring. They're tied for first place in the conference and beating really, really good teams, which is something that they've struggled to do over the last couple of seasons. Now, they've actually really struggled against some of the lower flight organizations this year. They've lost games to Philly, Port-au-Prince. They've lost games that they really kind of got away from them, and not only did they lose them, they lost them badly. So that's concerning, and it's something that we are not accustomed to seeing from that franchise. This was a franchise that prided itself on consistency from the years probably 2017, obviously through the dynasty in 18 and 19, and then even beyond, probably up into like 2022. It was almost unheard of to see them losing to a bottom 5 team. Now it happens fairly regularly, but the reason why I've liked what they've done this year and I've been impressed is they've gone out in big spots and beaten top blue blood teams that in years past have made them look like a younger brother. They're putting up big numbers inconsistently, right? A lot of big negative numbers as well, but showing that firepower again for the first time in probably 3 years is something that really excites me as a Lions fan. Again, it's sort of the opposite of what we're used to seeing from them. Consistency rather than explosive firepower, but the fact that they have that juice, they have that energy, they look like they have that fire again, that ability to go out against a top flight team on national TV in a big moment, a game of the week type situation, or potentially even a playoff game, and go out and win that ball game. It's something that they have really struggled to do over the past few years, and they seem to have gotten that back. And they've really, really struggled with injuries this year, and it's been really impressive to see their depth step up. GM Donk has made some interesting moves, especially on the pitching side, to piece together a banged-up pitching staff, and they've held serve and are only going to get healthier. So I'm going to give them an A-. Los Dominicanos. This is really interesting. I'm going to give them a C. I think the product on the field has been absolutely dismal. They're second to last in total scoring. They're 11-21 and obviously nowhere near playoff contention. So why do I give them a C? Well, they decided in the offseason they wanted to shift, or actually all the way back to last trade deadline, they wanted to shift gears, move off some of their aging stars, and start to retool for the future. And to be honest, it's a front office that has not demonstrated, a lot of competency over the last couple of years. Back in the day, GM Amos was a strong manager in particular. On the general managing side, always struggled a little bit to add new pieces. The roster got a little bit stagnant. They decided to move off some of those pieces and shift gears, which I respect. And they've stayed true to their plan this year for the first time. They've toyed around with rebuilding before, went in a different direction. It's been up, it's been down, it's been adding players, it's been buying, it's been selling all over the place. The reason why I'm not going to go any lower than a C is because they've stuck to their guns. They have a much clearer sense of what's going on. It might take a bit of time to get through this rebuild because it was such a hectic organization with a lot of turmoil, but they finally feel like they have some stability in the front office. They haven't played well on the field, but it looks like they're ready to commit to a plan, and I respect that. The Philadelphia Cheesesteaks, they've been all over the place this year, and what's funny is they've been so dysfunctional in the front office that it's really difficult to see them as having had a really strong first half. But then you zoom out, you look at the big picture, and you see that they're 14-8, okay? I wouldn't necessarily say in contention for a playoff spot, but they're in a position to maybe make things interesting in the much stronger vintage conference. Look, here's the thing about the Steaks, right? We give them a lot of flack, and a lot of it is deserved, right? They have had talent. They've struggled to get the most out of it. They've struggled to add to that talent, especially in the middle of the season. But they're in the toughest division with both the Aardvarks and the Dansby Lions. That takes a toll on you year after year, having to play those teams five games a year each. So that's 10 of your 45 games coming against dominant franchises historically, right? They're in the tougher conference. But they seem to always find a way, and they've actually beaten the Dansby Lions this year multiple times. They've knocked off a couple of really good teams. They have negative 141 total points, and they're still managing to win ball games. So there's something to be said for that. They've drafted well every single year, and in this weekend, I would like to think that they can continue that trend. And honestly, if they do, they're going to end up sort of accumulating a lot of really valuable pieces. I don't know if they'll be able to turn them into anything productive on the field anytime soon, but the fact that they're kind of holding steady in I think they deserve a little bit of slack, for their environment. Now, I don't want to give them too much leeway, right? Because they haven't been managed particularly well, right? They've thrown away a lot of games that they should have won via poor management, but they're holding serve, and I respect that. So I'm going to give them a C plus. The Emperors, also a C plus. They've shown flashes this year. They have. Now, they've been managed poorly, right? There's a lot of dysfunction in the front office, or on the management side at least right now. They've thrown away a lot of games against really good teams that they've kind of had, beat, and lost. Games that they shouldn't have. They haven't looked overmatched, and that's what I respect about them. So I'm going to give them a C plus because they haven't played well, obviously. They're in last place, tied for last place in the entire league and last place in the Vintage Conference. But they haven't looked overmatched at all. And a lot of the other bottom class organizations have. They seem competitive in every game. So I'm going to give them a C plus. And also what I really, really enjoy seeing from them is how aggressive they've been in the last couple of weeks trading in the trade market to acquire picks and move around in the draft. It looks like they have a very clear understanding of how they want to approach this weekend, and I like that they've been aggressive in trying to make that happen. Moving on to the Vintage West. The Honolulu Hornets, I wanted to give them an F, but I'm going to give them a D minus. Now, they've actually bounced back a little bit, but a complete bust of a season for them. They're 14-18 in the tougher Vintage Conference. They're not really in position to make a run for the playoffs. This was supposed to be the year, right? We've been saying it for a couple years, probably 2 or 3 years now. They've had the talent to honestly look like a blue blood organization, and they haven't even come close, not even remotely close. And it's disappointing because they're managed well, they have talent, but there's way too many holes, and they have not been aggressive enough in looking to fill them. Aaron Judge obviously is keeping them afloat. Without him, I mean, they have almost negative 200 points on the season, if not for Aaron Judge. So without him, they're probably in that bottom tier, maybe not bottom tier, but close to it. So a really disappointing season for the Hornets. I'm going to give them a D minus. The Hurricanes get the only F of the day. Complete disaster of a season. Nowhere close to playoff, even contention, even making things interesting. Again, a strong start, right? They went out and looked like they could finally be back, right? After 5 years it's been, probably, of a rebuild that is continuing to stall. And to be honest, it's been so poor on the field, and they haven't done anything to try to make something of it, right? Obviously, another year in which they're not going to compete. They haven't done anything to maybe add to the farm system, plan ahead for next year. They've done nothing at all other than continue to try to stay afloat and sort of in the middle of the pack in the standings, and failed to do so. So they have not advanced the organization in any way in 2025. I'm going to give them an F. The Michigan Mambas. I've talked about this on numerous occasions. You've read about it in the power rankings. I love what they've done this year. I'm going to give them an A. They're second to the Indians in the Vintage West. Firmly in a playoff spot. Positive points on the season with 35. Very, very strong. 20-12 total record. They've beaten great teams, right, which is something that they have struggled to do over the last couple of years. They're the model of consistency. They almost never lose to inferior teams, but they struggle to beat the good ones, or the really good ones, in years past. That's not the case this year. I think that they could make a run. I love what they've done. They know who they are. They're confident in who they are. They go out and they get the most out of their players because they're a little bit, I think, a little bit shy of some of the other elite teams in talent, but they go out and they get the best out of every single player they put on the field, and I really respect that. So I'm going to give them an A. The Mumbai Indians. A slow start, but what can you say? They're back to the top of their division. They look strong. They're third in total score. They're 4th in total scoring. I love what they've done. I mean, what can you say? They're 22-10 after a start in which they could have panicked. They could have maybe looked to add a piece here or there. They stayed true to themselves. They know who they are. They know they're not only a talented organization, but an even better run organization. And here they are, probably going to get a bye in the first round, potentially even a second one, because Atlanta and Dansville are going to continue to beat each other up. And then here comes the Indians flying under the radar up to the top of the vintage. What can you say? Now, I'm going to give them a B+. I'm not going to go any higher because it's been a disappointing year by their standards, but honestly, only by a hair. I'm going to give them a B+. And finally, the Pittsburgh Studs. Has been an interesting year there, but that trade with Dansville was a massive, massive deal, acquiring Bryce Rayner, Brent Rooker. What can you say? I mean, there's not much going on. There's not much for them to tap into, and they've done their best job of not only accumulating some talent, right? Now with the first overall pick this weekend, they're going to add a top prospect. They've added some juice to an organization that has been it's a fan base, obviously, with Sean Ryan at the helm, former GM of the year, right? High expectations. It's a franchise and a fan base that comes into every season expecting to make the playoffs. They haven't done it in a very long time. This season, obviously, the expectations were different, but they've added some juice to a frustrated organization, a frustrated fan base that now sees some top prospects in the hanging in the balance, and obviously an opportunity this weekend with the first pick of each round to do some damage. So I'm going to give them a C+ because they have not played well, but they've done their best to sort of rejuvenate this franchise. Finally, the modern East, the modern West, the Chicago Magos. I'm going to give them an A. They've played well in the regular season before, but this time, for the first time, they look like it's sustainable. They lead the league in total scoring by a country mile with 277 points. Lead the league in wins with 24. And they're beating excellent teams, which is, again, something they've struggled with. They've put up massive numbers for years, but they've struggled on the final days of matchups in years past. They've struggled to put together a complete performance, especially in big spots. They have not played well in primetime games. This year, it's a completely different story. They've dominated every single team that they've played. Obviously, they have held their own against the elite organizations and even have outdone them a little bit. The Magos are poised, and I know we've said this before and it hasn't come to fruition, but really poised for a championship run this year. I'm going to give them an A. They've been fantastic, right? They haven't been necessarily as consistent as, let's say, the Aardvarks or the Lions of years past, or the Kings, maybe in 2022. As a dominant team that just steamrolls every single team that they face. But if that's the bar, right, you're in a good spot. So I'm going to give them an A. The Cargo Shorts. It's been a disaster. And to be honest, they find themselves still it's funny, in playoff contention. They're 3 games out of the wild card. They are 3rd in the league in total scoring, but they sit at 500 at 16-16. So something's not adding up. They've been managed extremely poorly, which is rare. It's not something we're accustomed to seeing from them at all. And they, for the first time in a long time, look a little bit lost. They don't look like they have the same sort of energy within the organization. They don't have the same sort of stability within the organization. They're throwing away games that they should be winning. And they've had opportunities to beat really good teams and have kind of squandered them. So to be honest, I have to give them a really poor grade, even though they're in a decent spot, because they've had opportunities this year and they haven't come close to capitalizing on them. So I'm going to give them a D. The Compton Commodores. I thought this was going to be the year. I thought this could be, honestly, for the first time ever, that we were going to see a modern champion, a champion from the Modern Conference, via the Magos, the Bradfords, the Commodores. The Magos are doing their part. The Bradfords and the Commodores both sit at 19 and 13 and got off to a hot start, the Commodores did, but have kind of fallen back. I wouldn't even say to earth, because they're playing a little bit worse than they have in years past. So I'm going to give them a C. They've underperformed. They have not been aggressive in addressing their issues, in addressing their flaws. They don't have a lot of major holes, but the great championship level teams see even the smallest blemishes, and they are aggressive in seeking out ways to patch them up. And that's not something that they've done this year. The San Diego Sandpipers are going to get a B-. They have negative 235 points and still somehow find themselves in playoff contention. They're 4 games out. They've lost their last 4 straight, which is an issue. But they're managed so incredibly well with such a lack of talent. And the championship back in 2021, I think, disguised a lot of their flaws for a long time, right? They had no firepower. They struggled to, they were consistent, but they struggled to really put together a complete performance against top-level teams. They won a championship, right? The only modern team, this was before the Modern Conference existed, but the only Modern Conference team, as it's constructed now, to ever win a title. And they did so as the 7th seed. They weren't particularly strong that year. I think they got a couple breaks in the postseason. I'm not going to take anything away from them. This is the hardest league in the world to win a championship in, and they did that, so you have to give them all the credit in the world. But I think it masked a lot of their flaws, and they haven't done a good job in years past of addressing them from an organizational standpoint. But management-wise this season, I think they've done everything they can with the roster they have and still find themselves in a position to maybe add a piece at the deadline and make some noise come August. So I've been impressed with that, and I have to give them a B-. Right? Obviously, I can't go higher, but I've actually enjoyed seeing them make the most of what they have. They, every single year, just do a fantastic job of playing with energy. They play with passion. They're never out of a game. They do everything the right way. I just don't think they have the talent to really compete against the top half of the league. And finally, the Boulder Bonzos. Formerly the Ithaca Impalas. Here's the deal. They're going to get an incomplete. To this point in the season, obviously before the firing of Zach Farber, one of the worst teams we've ever seen in league history. Obviously, I don't think anything is ever going to come close to the 2016 Seattle Mariners, who went 0-30, but it's not been pretty in Ithaca, and now they moved to Boulder. Here's what I'm going to do. Because this was going to be, I was originally intending on these shows being like an hour. What I'm going to do, because I wasn't, again, sure how I wanted to convey this show, how I wanted to present it both visually and audibly, etc., and content-wise and structurally and also just aesthetically, I'm going to cut the show here after I wrap this up, and I'm going to do a part 2 before the draft preview show, probably on Saturday, I would guess. We'll do it early because obviously the draft is on Sunday. Next week's episode is going to be a draft preview, my mock draft, all that kind of stuff. I'm going to split this week's episode into 2 parts. So I'm posting this one now. Obviously, you've already watched it. And I'm going to post a part 2 because I had a lot more stuff to talk about, but I don't want the time to get away from me, especially because we're posting late. I'm going to address a couple of things that I wanted to touch on in a part 2 version early this week, probably maybe Wednesday or so, before the draft preview a week from now, or actually a little bit less, because we have to do it early. So, just to wrap this up, Ithaca did not have a good season. William Carson Rampy and Jacob Durando come in. They take over the organization. It's in a difficult spot, and I'm excited to see obviously what they can do from a talent acquisition standpoint. They've decided to move the organization to Boulder, Colorado. The cargo shorts were obviously gave them the go-ahead, and credit to them for that, to take themselves, relocate and share the Colorado market. But you know what? I was going to even start to kind of tease this next segment, but I'm going to save it because I have a lot to say about how Zach Farber's tenure kind of unfolded, why it kind of unraveled, and what it says about some other teams in the league that kind of might be in a similar position. So be on the lookout for part 2. I appreciate your time. That was the first half grades. It took a little bit longer than I anticipated, so that's why I'm cutting it short. But thank you for joining me. Have a good one, and get excited for the draft this Sunday. Time TBD, and mock draft and draft preview to come. Thank you all. Have a great night.